Welcome back to Next Life Garage. Got my bean juice with me this morning, standing here in front of Big Karen. We finally racked up enough miles to do an oil change and tackle the oil cooler on this thing that's been leaking for a while. I'm not going to lie to you and say that I've done this before and that it'll get done today. Got some obligations with the paying gig, and this will be my first time doing one of these things, so y'all get to learn with me. Hopefully things will go as planned, but they probably won't. I'll get you out of the sky, show you where the oil cooler is and how it's mounted up to the engine, what I think needs to be done to get it out. Probably gonna make a mess with the Cool Aide and the leftover refined and recycled dinosaur bits. We'll put some cardboard out and some pans underneath it, try to catch it all so we don't make too big a mess. It probably will be a mill of a mess underneath here. I'll show you what's going on before I get at it and try to get her done. We're looking at the front top of the engine here on BK. Gonna be difficult to see. Right here is the front top of the oil cooler, and there's a bolt right there that goes through to secure it to the timing cover. There's a bolt down on the bottom, just two on the front side. I'll have to crawl underneath the truck to show you where it bolts up in the back, so I'm gonna go ahead and do that real quick. This is the back side of the oil cooler. The oil filter actually hangs off of it back here. You've got the block heater tied in right there for the cold starts. Heats up the block on cold days, so it's not quite so hard to start. You got a bolt here holding it on, bolt back there, and then one in the middle holding it in place. While we're under here, I'll give you a sneak peek of the up pipes that we're going to be replacing to get our full power and efficiency back out of this thing. This is the pilot side up pipe bolted to exhaust manifold there. Basically they call it an up pipe because it directs the exhaust flow up to the top of the engine where the turbo sits. But for today we're focused on that oil cooler. We're going to have to take out the block heater. Obviously we're going to have to drop the oil filter, unbolt it from the front where we just were, and try and snake that thing out through the back here. But that's basically what I'm going to be working on today, as well as doing an oil change. And we'll go ahead and probably do a partial flush on the coolant, since we are going to have to break that system loose in order to get this stuff done. But I'm going to get at it. We've got the oil cooler broken loose. We're raining some Cool Aide back there on the back side of it pretty bad. Managing to catch most of it in the pan though, keeping it on the cardboard. So I'm going to let it finish draining. Then we'll get the top front bolt out, pull the oil cooler out, then we can get it apart and get it resealed and put back in. Just wanted to see y'all to see what kind of mess you can get into when you tackle a project like this at home. I've got the oil cooler out of Big Karen here, kind of looking at it backwards from how it was installed in the truck. This is the rear portion where the oil filter screws on, and this is the front portion where it ties into the timing cover. I've made some reference marks on these pins right here on the rear side, referencing that where that pin is so that it's clocked properly when we put it back together. I've also made reference mark on this pin on the front so that we'll know how that's supposed to go back together, so hopefully things will line back up like they're supposed to when we go to install this thing back in the truck. It's pretty nasty. It was leaking from right here on the front side. You can kind of see a little bit of wet in there. It wasn't leaking bad, but it was leaking, causing quite a big mess on the front of the engine. After we get this installed, we'll clean that back up so we can make sure there's no more oil coming back out of this thing. But I'll set you up in the sky so y'all can watch me get this off. Both of these end housings are cast aluminum, so you got to be kind of careful getting those off. You don't want to hit them too hard. I'm going to be using the dead blow hammer right here, and I'm going to make a more permanent reference instead of those Sharpie marks with a little center punch right here. But I'll set y'all up in the sky so y'all watch me take it apart. I am going to be using Ford original gaskets for this thing. We've got 310,000 miles out of the original ones, so I figure we go with original equipment stuff. Maybe we'll get another 300,000 miles out of it. Got the big seal right there, probably to seal the oil. Got the smaller seals there, one on each end, probably for the coolant. And then you got the plate for the rear head unit for the oil cooler, and the plate for the front head on the oil cooler. So I'll set you guys up in high speed and let y'all watch me whiz around while I get this thing apart. I will probably take it and clean it up a little bit off camera and then bring it back and reassemble it. Now we'll be using clean oil on these seals when I reassemble everything. Day 2 on BK here. I did manage to get the oil cooler back together and installed back on the truck. Today I'll be topping off fluids, replacing the lower radiator hose that I found to be starting to deteriorate once I got into this thing. So it's going to be a little bit more of a Cool Aide mess today, but at least that's going to be done, and we'll get most of the fluid flushed back out of the system. So we'll have nice clean Cool Aide in there as we go forward. After that, we'll probably clean up the block. I'm not going to show you guys that. You know, purple power and a low pressure washer to get the stuff off the front of the engine, just so we can monitor for leaks in the future. But I'm going to get this wrapped up today, and we'll show you everything back installed once we get it done. So the oil cooler's reinstalled right down in here again. I'll shine some better light down in there. I'm just getting my pointer in there so you guys can see what I'm pointing at. And I lost my pointer. Don't want to stay in there. Oil cooler's hooked back up right there. Shine a little light down in there. Right there where the arrow's resting, you can see the shiny little new gasket in between the timing cover and the front of the oil cooler. We'll crawl underneath, take a look at it from under there as well, so you can see what it looks like reinstalled with the new gasket in. We do have a bit of an oil leak coming from the top of the engine. I believe it's related to the turbo pedestal. I won't know until we get that stuff off when we attack the up pipes. But here's the back side of the oil cooler. Oil filter hanging there. New gasket sandwiched there in between the block and the oil cooler. Block heater hooked back up. It's a pretty simple thing. That ring that you see on opposite sides of that thing just kind of slides off, and then the plug pulls out of there. So no need to unscrew that bung from the hole. But you can see we got some oil running down the back of the block there. And again, I believe that's coming from the turbo pedestal where the oil feed and return go into the top of the intake manifold up there. But we'll attack that when we get to these up pipes. Just wanted to show you guys what it looked like reassembled. That's going to wrap up the oil cooler job on Big Karen. It wasn't too bad. Hardest part was getting the end tanks back on, or the header tank on the oil cooler itself. You see in the high speed that the rear tank went on pretty easily on the bench. The front tank, however, was a different story. It took some doing to that. I put it in the vise, tried to push it back on, twisted it at the same time, beat on it a little bit on the bench, and finally I just put a 2x4 down on the floor, and I grabbed the rear half by the oil filter housing and just kind of sat down on it and rapped on it with the dead blow hammer, being sure not to hit myself in the giblets. That would end the day pretty quickly. But it did end up going together. All in all, I've got probably 7 hours in the project, you know, even replacing the lower radiator hose here. That's what kept me from getting it done yesterday. You can see it kind of started to delaminate from all the oil sitting on it that was dripping out of that oil cooler. But managed to get one. Parts store had it in stock. Went ahead and replaced that. So also, before you spin the oil filter on these diesels, you know, those things hold about 1.5 quart of oil in the filter itself. It's a good idea to prime it. You don't want to fire the truck up with that filter empty, as all you're doing is filling up that filter while the truck's running with no oil in it. So that's another good thing to do. As far as bolting the oil cooler back on, they weren't real tight when I broke them loose, probably about as tight as a spark plug should be, somewhere in the 18 to 22 foot-pound range, so I put them back to 18. Should hold everything together, and we'll do a little shakedown on her and make sure she's not leaking anymore. But first I got to clean off the front of the block so I can see if there's any more coming out. But I'm going to fire it up, let it run for a few seconds, and then I'll shut her back down, check the oil, make sure it's topped off where it's supposed to be. And after that's done, I'll fire it back up again, let it get up to temperature, open the thermostat, start circulating some of that new Cool Aide through there, and top that back off, and she should be good to go. Thank y'all for watching. I appreciate y'all tuning in. Check out our other videos on the Nissan, the Jeep, the tractor, Aunt Buck. Got plenty more on the way. So until next time, don't take no wooden nickels, and be good. After a while, crocodiles.